Yes, we can hear you. Okay, so this presentation is actually zooming into one of the items that Satish mentioned, which is content. It's great to have all the technical infrastructure of supporting languages, but if there are no websites and no mobile apps or very little in languages, then it's not very useful to the end users. My background is kind of on the boundary between Silicon Valley. I worked for Google for many, many years and developing countries. So I spent the past 15 years working all over Africa and Asia. And I want to dig into the dynamics of how language support actually happens. So this is Silicon Valley, and in this presentation, I'll use the term Silicon Valley as just a shorthand for the global technology industry. I'm not picking specifically on the Bay Area in California. This is the global issue. So how does the global technology industry look? How is it structured? So basically, from a product perspective, it is based on products. So products can either be in startups that typically have one product, or they can be in a big company that has many products. But in both cases, the actual product evolution happens more or less the same. In the small company, it's usually driven by the founder. In a large company, it's somebody whose title is product manager, but they work in more or less the same way. So how does a product's evolution over time look in respect to language support? So most often, when a startup or a new product in a big company starts, there's a big pressure on launch, get it out to the market as quickly as possible, and then usually it's just in English. After things relax a little bit, year two, there's let's start thinking about international, and then typically there's a few important languages added like Spanish, French, Chinese, maybe also Russian, maybe also Japanese, but a short list of languages. And a few years after that, somebody comes up with this idea called emerging markets. There's a few billion people that live in developing countries. Actually, most of humanity lives in developing countries. And then they scratch their head and say, what is emerging markets? They quickly look it up and say, oh, we need to support Hindi and Indonesian. And if we want to go out of our way, maybe we will also support Thai and Vietnamese. And they stop at that. And then what happens after that is you have this regular routine of releasing versions of the software. Some companies do it every month, some companies do it every year, but some way in between that. And then the product manager, when planning what goes into the new release, prioritizes all the feature requests that have come in. These can be customer requests, they can be new ideas or bug fixes and so on. And then it's trying to maximize some kind of metric. And that metric can be how many users are using the product, or how many downloads they're getting, or what's the user engagement, or what is the revenue. But whatever the metric is, the job of the product manager is to select, to prioritize all the features in the database and select those ones that will maximize the increase in the metric he's measuring for the engineering resources that he has, that he can deploy for this version. So then he draws the line, which is, in this example, the red line. And guess what? Something like support Cambodian language is ranked 5,721 in the priority list and doesn't beat the cutoff. So it's out of this release 13. And do you think it will be in release 14? Also not. And also not in release 24. And in fact, there will be no point in the future in which supporting Cambodian languages would yield a better return for the metric that the product manager is seeking versus any top priority feature, so it will never be supported. And the problem with this is this is replicated product by product across the whole industry. So basically everybody is doing the same, and these languages are not getting support. So this is an example of Cambodian language. These are actual stats. So of the 3 to 5 million apps published across all application stores in the world, only 1 in 10,000 supports Cambodian language. And I'm using Cambodian here as an example, but this applies to most of the languages of the world. And even though the number 1 in 10,000 is deceiving because the vast majority of these apps are local apps developed in Cambodia, if you remove the local apps, the number of global apps that support Cambodian language is very close to zero. So why does this matter? So meet Kim Rong. She's my mother-in-law, the mother of my wife. She's a Cambodian middle-class woman. Uh, Here you can see her in her business, lives in the capital, so this is not a rural issue. Owns a smartphone, and like most Cambodian people, she can read, write, and speak only in Cambodian language. As a result, she's locked out of 99.99% of apps and 99.997% of websites. And these are actual numbers, not made up numbers. So what we're seeing is that the actual structure of how the technology industry operates is worsening the digital divide between rich and poor countries. So there's many reasons for this digital divide, right? Lower educational levels, lower spending ability, and all these other things. But the technology industry itself is not only not contributing to fixing this, but it's actually accelerating and deteriorating the situation. And it's not because of anybody's bad intentions, it's a structural problem in the industry. So some ideas of how to fix this, having been trying to do this for many years. So when you talk to product managers, as I've done a lot, and about languages of the world, most of them are not, they know, a little bit about languages, but they're not really experts in the languages of the world. And the way they see languages is something like this. They'll go to a resource like Ethnologue and look at that and say, oh my God, the world has more than 6,000 languages. We can never ever support so many languages. So what we'll do is we'll just chip away at the problem. Every year we'll add support for a few more languages. And this is really this prioritization exercise. And what happens is when you're done with the languages that really get you a big bang for the buck in terms of your engineering use, so you end up not actually adding any more languages. So you'll be hard pressed to find products that support a large number of languages, especially outside of the big platform vendors. So Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple have a large support, but outside of those four companies, it's very hard to find any product that supports a large number of languages. So it's important to understand how languages work. And Stish actually kind of touched on this when he said, in India, people have their mother tongue, but then they use the internet in English. So let's just dive into this because this is really important. So I just picked DR Congo example because it's one of the world's most diverse countries in terms of languages. It's a big country in Central Africa. It has 90 million people. and 200 languages, and there are 4 national languages, which are regional. So each region of the country has a different national language. And if you're born in DR Congo, you likely speak your mother tongue. I mean, you of course speak your mother tongue. You speak your father's tongue. If in a common case that your father and your mother don't speak the same one of the 200 languages. Primary school is done in the national language of your region, so that's year 1 to 4. Then starting year 5, the language of instruction at school switches to French. And then Lingala is the biggest and most important of these 4 national languages. So everybody in Congo can speak some Lingala. Most of TV, music, and so on is in Lingala. And then if you're lucky and you get to university, then English is required. So you need to speak 6 languages, and these are just the basic, right? Before you speak any other languages or foreign languages. And all of these 6 languages are actually used on a daily basis in different social contexts. Speak to your family and relatives, you might use one language. When you're in a business or professional meeting, you might speak another language. But what is interesting is while spoken language and music and TV is in all these local languages, when it comes to writing, it's only one language. And in the case of DR Congo, it's French. 100% of everything written is in French, which happens to be the colonial language of Congo, but it's not always the colonial language. In the case of Tanzania, it's Swahili. In the case of Ethiopia, it's Amharic. But that's really important to understand when you think about support for text-based apps as opposed to video-based apps. So if you want to support a mobile app or a website for Congo, you only need to support French. I'll qualify that statement in a second, but in general. So let's instead of trying to solve all the problems, let's zoom into one problem, but it's actually the majority of cases. So these are let's talk about apps that are textual. So again, mobile apps and websites are usually textual. They communicate language through reading and writing as opposed to hearing and seeing. Let's talk about apps that are global. So apps that are meant for everyone. They're not kind of zooming into a specific country. You can imagine that if you have an app that's very local, like the India rail ticket reservation that was mentioned, then you really want to go and support many languages and go deeply local. But if you're developing instant messaging app or some kind of app that's global, let's focus on those. And then let's exclude children, apps that are specifically for children, because of the structure described before in Congo, and it's similar in many countries where children often speak only the local language and then they pick up the national language as they grow up. So let's exclude children. This subset of apps is still the majority of apps and websites out there. So the key thing to understand, and I've been going around and just saying this sentence 1,000 times every year. The most important thing to understand that people don't understand is to support the entire population of the world in their preferred language of reading and writing. You only need to support 80 languages. So why 80 languages? So I spent years roaming around Africa and Asia trying to understand these dynamics of what determines which language people prefer to read and write in. And I looked at many metrics. I looked at the media, I looked at the education system, I looked at different layers of society, but it ended up being only one metric that determines what language population is going to read and write in, which is the language of instruction of high school. And that even applies for people that didn't attend high school. If they end up being literate, which is not always the case, but if they do, they are literate in the language of high school because of the education high school, because that's the language of the contents. You can learn. There are orthographies for many languages in the world, writing systems, a dictionary, how to spell words, many languages. However, if there's no content in these languages, if there are no books, if there are no websites, then that language is not actually used in reading and writing. So what we care about for the purpose of apps on the internet and websites is what's the languages actually used for reading and writing, and that is a language of instruction in the high school. And if you create a list of all the languages of instruction in high school across the entire world, which I did, the number is 80. So counterintuitively, there are some very large languages in the world that are not written languages. For example, Javanese in Indonesia has 100 million speakers. Bisaya in Philippines has 20 million speakers. But all of these languages are not the primary written language of the population. Now, it doesn't mean that people won't send the SMS casually in that language, or use it in an informal sense. But any type of real reading and writing of content is in another language, which is listed here. So, how to fix this? How to fix the problem that my mother-in-law cannot access technology? So the first thing is what we need is a mind shift in the technology industry, and that's that slide, that very important slide that I said before. We need to shift from language support being an incremental improvement over time, and because that doesn't work, that's the method today, it doesn't work, to a state of mind where languages is something you need to support. It's like security, it's like privacy, it's like one of these overhead tasks that's not kind of core of your product, but you just need to get it done. And you can get it done right away at the early stages of the product. Now, to get it done right away at the early stages of the product, we need systems that are and products and companies that specialize in that are not the companies that develop the apps, because the guy that's sitting in somewhere in the world and developing a new instant messaging, he doesn't. That company is not an expert in localization or languages and so on. They need to plug in the same way that you get some kind of interface to do all the other stuff like payments, like security and so on. Something that just happens. You pay for it, it happens. So we need standardized localization tools. Specifically, they need to be real-time publishing and not this blind translation when you send something to translation and get it back 2 weeks later, and the translator has no idea of the context of where this is going. We need translation vendors, which are these companies that you'd send your product to, your strings in the product to, and they'll translate it to all the languages you want. We need them to not be passive about the list of languages and to just say, tell us what languages you want and we'll translate, but just say, this is the package of the world's languages. You, customer, don't have to worry about it. We'll translate it for you to all the world's languages. And then finally, we need the platforms, the application stores that are really the critical drivers of change in many aspects of apps to also at least incentivize apps that support all languages. And there are many ways to incentivize in ranking and so on. So that's something really important. That's it. That's all I have to say. And thank you very much.